and welcome back to Consumer Choice Radio here on the Big Talker 106.7 FM. We're very delighted for our next guest on the program. We're speaking with Geoff Whaling. He's a business executive, chair of the National Hemp Association, a co-founder and president of Collective Growth Corporation, and the man you need to get on the phone if you want to learn all about the magical qualities and everything we can do with the hemp plant. So, Geoff, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Good to be here. Happy holidays to you and to your listeners.
Thank you so much. So we wanted to get you on because David and I have often spoken about, in general terms, cannabis for various reasons. We've talked about CBD. We've talked about the rules for recreational and medicinal, but we haven't really talked about hemp, the actual plant, and all the different industrial uses that most people don't realize. There was a huge reform with the Farm Bill that changed a lot of things in the United States. David and I, we've been trying to follow this as advocates, but to actually have someone who's been helping spearhead much of that policy, or at least put it in a more consumer and market-friendly decision, we thought we'd talk to you. So tell us, what is sort of the status right now of hemp, the hemp industry, and where do you see this going, and how will it impact individual people and maybe companies to come?
There's a lot to kind of pack into that response. So, hemp now is a federally legal commodity crop. It is language contained within the 2018 Agricultural Improvement Act. Ironically, it is the only legislation that both Senator Schumer and McConnell have agreed upon. But at the end of the day, they know the benefits that this new commodity crop can bring to the American landscape. And we all know that farmers need a helping hand. So hemp is now a crop that we can reintroduce to our landscape. That being said, it's going to be a challenge because this crop has been always part of the cannabis marijuana conversation. People tend to think that hemp is marijuana, and to clarify, hemp is part of the cannabis family, but it is not marijuana. So hemp, in order to be designated a commodity crop, has to have less than 0.3% THC, that psychoactive element that is contained and beneficial in marijuana. Hemp cannot have any of that. Trying to educate not only consumers, but farmers, but absolutely every federal agency and every large corporation that, oh, by the way, hemp is legal, and it is no different than corn today. Going from nothing to where we are today is a big step, but there are many other big steps that we have to take because there is no harvesting equipment, there is no processing or decortication equipment to take this very valuable 20-foot crop apart and to use it for everything that it can present to consumers and to the marketplace.
And on that note, so I know this because actually I had the pleasure of hearing you explain this in New York City at an event we were both at. But would you walk through for our listeners what else hemp can actually be used for beyond extracting CBD and using that for whatever purposes you want for CBD, whether it's pet food or personal ingestion? What else can hemp do, or what else can hemp be used for?
Yeah, so David, I think the easy way to explain that is kind of to break down this crop. First of all, as I said, it is a crop that can grow 20 feet tall in 110 days. It is planted the very same way that corn is planted. So late spring and harvested early fall. It is an annual crop, but let's break down that 21-foot crop. The top 18 inches of this crop is seed. And certainly the seed itself is 100% digestible protein and a perfectly balanced omega-3, 6, and 9. That seed contains 30% oil. So if you cold press the seed, you don't get CBD oil. That comes from extracting the plant material and leaves. You get oil as you would instantly. It becomes a salad dressing. or a low saute oil. If you refine that further, it becomes the base elements for body care and cosmetics. It's a natural moisturizer. Refine that oil further. You come up with industrial lubricants and refine it further. It becomes the base for resins and paints. What you have left over once you cold press that seed is the casings. And that can be refined, be 100% protein. And that protein is probably the best protein on the planet. We all hear about plant-based foods right now. A lot of those are containing pea protein, and there's an aftertaste as part of that pea protein being incorporated, which means they have to add other things to take that taste out. Hemp protein does not have any taste. So it is 100% digestible and a perfect protein. Refine those casings even further, you get the base for gluten-free flour. And that's just the beginning, the top 18 inches. We talked about CBD, it's extracted from the plant material. So the leaves in this case would be where you could extract CBD. But then there is the rest of this stalk. It has two major components, the fiber and the inner core. The fiber, we all will remember that fiber was once used for hemp rope. And it was used for canvas for sails. The US military were the biggest consumers of hemp. But it is also part of the history of America. Most people are not aware that Betsy Ross's flag, the original flag that she produced, was produced on hemp fabric. That drafts of the Declaration of Independence were written on hemp paper. It was the largest source of paper in early times. And certainly, most of the new states that were coming on board, like Pennsylvania, the very first act in Pennsylvania was the Hemp Act. And if you wanted to be a patriot of this nation, you were required to grow hemp. And that hemp was used for fuel, for food, for clothing, and for feed. So it's not like this crop has not been around. But today, that fiber on the outer side has the same properties as copper. It holds an electric charge. It is as strong as steel. So if you look at things that are using materials from the earth, oil products, we can replace all of those plastics with hemp. You can build an automobile. Certainly BMW is one of the leaders in this space, but most of the European manufacturers have been using hemp over the years for headliners and carpeting. But now we've got companies that are looking at building batteries with hemp and replacing lithium batteries with hemp. The sky is the absolute limit for this. Then the inner woody core instantly can become one of the best animal beddings or landscaping mulches, but it also can be used to make plastics, bioplastics. And last but not least, you can build an entire house out of hemp. That woody core mixed with lime and water holds a form, and it has an R factor of 2 for every inch of thickness. It is not a structural material, but it certainly is an insulation factor. So I'm now starting to see very creative developments of Lego bricks that look like a hemp building block that people are doing. So, as we are meeting all of the standards, because there are no standards for any of these things right now in America, we have to get them passed, whether it be with the FDA or the Department of Energy or the Standards Association. People often say, well, it's legal now, why can't I do this? Well, there are rules that we need to abide by, and there are responsibilities the government have. And certainly we need to work with them to get this thing passed and move forward. And as you know, I can go on about this.
We're speaking with Geoff Whaling of Collective Growth Corporation and the National Hemp Association here on Consumer Choice Radio on the Big Talker. Fancy enough, we've got three Canadians on the phone, 2 dual nationals of the States and Canada, which is awesome. I did do a little bit of research there, Geoff, and found out that you are known there where you're living in Pennsylvania as the Hemperor. And you've
Indeed.
been called an evangelist for hemp. And I think one thing that David and I, we mentioned before is that we do meet a lot of elected officials, and we've talked a little bit about the differences between cannabis, THC, CBD, all of this, and then enter hemp. And, this history that you just mentioned is just lost on people. Do you think that is the single biggest sort of barrier to broader use or expansion of hemp, or is it just that we just don't have any of the foundationals? We don't have the equipment that you're talking about. We don't have the processing plants. Is it more because of attitudes, or is it actual just capital that we don't have right now?
What I realized when I step back and look at where we were and where we are today, a couple things come to mind. This is a generational issue. The reality is that most legislators, particularly members of the U.S. Senate, are of a much older generation. Hats off to the Duponts and William Randolph Hearst for creating what I believe is one of the most successful marketing campaigns ever introduced. I remind people, and certainly members of your audience won't know, that most people in the 1930s and 40s got all of their news from the theaters that they would go to every weekend. There would be news tone flashes. Those theaters were owned by William Randolph Hearst, and at the opening of the major cinema event, there would be a flash that would say, "Save your children from hemp and marijuana." Well, that has stuck with most people who are a little older than me, and most definitely with those people who are elected officials. I remember having a discussion with Chuck Grassley, who wasn't really convinced that hemp was different than marijuana. He thought that this was just a gateway. And he asked me why most young people were supportive of hemp. And I said, well, to be honest, Senator, they no longer have to get their information from you. They have a smartphone, and they can read, and they know about the sustainability. They know about how it can help improve the planet, that it consumes more CO2 than any other crop on the planet, and it needs no pesticides or fertilizers. That's important to this generation. So that is kind of the first issue. But most universities could not touch hemp to research it, and because it wasn't federally legal, and they really threatened, all of the federal funding that they got if they touched it. Their chief counsels wouldn't allow them to get involved in researching hemp, even though the 2014 Farm Bill allowed for the research of hemp. And now that it's legal, I am now starting to see corporate America come on board. And certainly, our partnership with New Holland Agriculture is a good example of that. They would not talk to us 3 years ago because legally they couldn't. It wasn't a legal crop. Well, now that it is, they're all starting to focus on this, and we're on our way. I really do believe that 2021 is going to be the year of hemp in America.
And on that note of why 2021 is going to be the year of hemp, is that just because of the work that has been done in the lead up to now, or how much of it is reliant on this incoming administration? Do you have any inclination as to where a Biden administration will go in this regard? If there's any maybe hurdles or barriers that still exist?
Well, certainly, I've worked with both the Obama administration and the Trump administration. Obviously, we made huge leaps for the crop with the Trump administration. Obviously, the president signed the Farm Bill into law, so he gets the credit for this. I've been asked recently about, Secretary Vilsack being nominated to take over USDA again. What does that mean for hemp? Well, I remind people that I started with Secretary Vilsack. But his hands were tied at the time because it wasn't federally legal. No federal agency could touch it. I remember the very first guidance that came out of USDA. I worked with the chief counsel under Vilsack. The fact that NIFA, the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, after 5 years of wanting to do so, came out 2 weeks ago offering a grant program of up to $150 million for research to advance, and specifically inviting applications to advance the hemp industry. I mean, that is telling to me that, yes, 2021 is going to really help us. There's a lot of research that has to be done. There's huge potential, but, let's not just rely on anecdotal evidence, as, we are in the CBD industry and others. Let's prove it out so that big industry can start to adopt it. I remind people that, farmers are not going to grow a crop if they don't know where a market is. And on the other extreme, the large end users, the auto industry, home builders and others, they are not even going to invest in a pilot program unless they know where that supply chain comes from. So it's not a chicken and egg issue, it's a scrambled egg issue. And that's why my partner, Bruce Linton, and I created Collective Growth, because, we are believers. Certainly I've learned this all along the way. So we are, quite frankly, putting our money where our mouth is and bringing a lot of shareholders along with us to build that supply chain. And certainly, I think that we're going to see more and more people, invest in this space to build this commodity crop.
And you mentioned working with Bruce Linton, who's also with you at Collective Growth Corporation. And, from what I can tell on the financial wires, you guys have been pretty busy. Bruce, if anyone would remember, was in all the first videos and images we were seeing of cannabis being legalized in various stores and things. And, it was really this grand experiment that, David and I have quibbled a lot about how regulations have been done there when it comes to the recreational market. But for the industrial uses, you guys have really opened up an entirely new area that I know that just reading the financial press the last couple of weeks, things are really, we need some kind of dynamic change. Certainly, we've all been sitting at home the last couple of months. Many people have been without work. The various industries that we thought would be booming forever are kind of slowing. Others are growing. How do you see sort of, yes, 2021 year of hemp, but what is the next big step that you think the industry needs to make sure that this can be a good, sustainable crop that we can use basically in every industry?
Well, there's a couple of things. Obviously, money is going to be very important to that equation. And certainly that's where Bruce and I will do our job. We have not, we haven't abandoned hemp. We did a transaction last week that resulted in us working to bring a LiDAR autonomous driving technology to market. People are like, well, what's that got to do with hemp? Isn't that what you set out to do? What we realized after looking at maybe 170 companies around the world is that the hemp industry isn't large enough to participate in the financial instrument that Bruce and I established. But we've decided that there are different ways to approach this. When we were approached by one of the big underwriters to see whether or not we would be interested in participating with them, we looked at this transaction and looked at who some of the players are. And when we saw that BMW, obviously as a world OEM, and Magna International, a Canadian company that is the largest tier one supplier to the automotive industry, supplying 12 OEMs, we decided not only to undertake some more research, because at the end of the day, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders to bring them a good transaction and a return. But then we also realized that the benefit for hemp was that the biggest end users are the automotive industry. So this would line us up with definitely with Magna International, the gentleman who oversees their technology division, who was responsible for the Innoviz LiDAR development for the previous 2 years. During this process, became the CEO of Magna. We think that this is the right move. We will, we see it as a bit of a detour for us, but we will be right back on the road and refocusing on hemp, and we won't let the industry down.
And on that note of automakers and hemp and the relationship there, I know you mentioned things like liners, but to what other extent can you incorporate the plant into the automotive industry? And if you could just enlighten our listeners so that they can actually understand its multi-use in terms of when we look at something we recognize quite easily, which is a car, where else can we insert this technology and this agricultural product?
Yeah, so most people, when they hear me say about hemp being used in a car, they think of a one-off kind of funny looking car. I just have to tell them that if they see a BMW i Series, whether it be the i3 or i8, which is BMW's all electric vehicles, and now their 5 Series, they see any of those passing on the street, they contain hemp. The Mercedes C-Class has got huge amounts of hemp in it. And I do also have to kind of say that BMW has backed away from hemp an awful lot because their supply chain isn't available. So they have it in small components in some of them, but they obviously would like to use it. You could make certainly doors, complete door systems, complete interiors, all of the seats, and because hemp, ironically, because of COVID-19, but because hemp is one of the best antimicrobial fibers on the planet, we now are getting people asking in the automotive industry whether or not it could be put into headrests. So, there are lots of uses that it can, but what I think is probably one of the biggest opportunities is using hemp for the hemp fiber for electronics, nanosheet technologies, and for carrying that, that current or technology. So it has to be explored, but I think that more and more people, I've also come from a background in the automotive industry through motorsports. I know that the automotive industry usually develops these new technologies in luxury brands, and then they slowly come down, to consumer cars. I have to say I'm disappointed that despite the fact that Henry Ford built the very first hemp sedan in 1939, 1940, Ford has not yet incorporated natural fibers or Henry Ford's vision into their vehicles. But I participated in a panel recently on the battery industry. The global head of Ford's electrification was there. One of the questions I asked him is, how are you going to change the mindset within Ford so that they will look at the benefits of natural fibers over the traditional process of saying, this is the piece that we need to have it made to these standards, and it has to be the cheapest possible way to keep costs down. And he said that certainly it's an internal work in progress, but that's where we need to get. So going back to your earlier question about 2021, the benefits of what I hear from the Harris group within the Biden-Harris transition team is that they really are going to be focusing an awful lot on climate change. They've asked us to look at 12 of the policy areas under climate change that they're going to focus on. What can hemp do in those areas? I think 10 of those areas we can participate in. And if we start to see them introducing regulations, and all of us love regulations, but as they have in Europe, the European Union has mandated the automotive industry to reduce their carbon footprint by 8% starting in 2025. If that happens, then certainly you're going to see American-grown fibers being incorporated into the vehicles. I certainly know that the free trade agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. Includes a requirement that more American-grown fiber is used in the vehicles produced under that treaty, but doesn't specify hemp. I'm going to do my job to make sure that hemp will be there.
Yeah, I love that. And Geoff, I don't want to monopolize all your time. I do have another last question here. Very important, I think, for your dual role, because as we mentioned, you are a business executive, and I'd love to talk about Formula E all day, but that's another time. But you've also been between the world of sort of advocacy, nonprofits, working on behalf of the entire hemp industry and not just your company, and then also being in the business world. What advice would you give for, let's say, youthful Canadian activists who would like to see, the development of this industry and want to have the best sort of regulatory system to promulgate it? Where should we be putting our focus? What should be sort of our articulation or our communication? What do you think that the business industry would need in order to succeed on the policy side?
I think that people who are interested in seeing this commodity crop advance, do your homework. Not that I'm here to promote, membership of the National Hemp Association. You do not need to be a member to log into our website and to research hemp. But know the facts. There is a lot of discussion out there about what hemp can be and what it can't be. But a lot of that needs to be proven out. Educate yourself. There are lots of resources out there. Another really good one is the Congressional research groups review of the hemp industry and its potential. And what I've encouraged people to look at is that a lot of young people today are looking at new technologies, and I am seeing technologies being developed that are not 2 years from now, they're 5 and 10 years from now. I see that Thomas Jefferson University, and Jefferson is what it's called today, after a merger with the Pennsylvania Textile University, they are developing textiles that also have biometrics in them, and they're 100% hemp. So it's, and it's washable. I mean, it really is a usable piece of fabric. And that is the potential of hemp, because it absorbs energy, it stores it. You can do some amazing things. I tell people when I speak that 5 years from now, we will still be researching this crop and slowly starting to build an industry. 10 years from now, we will be well on our way to a multi-billion-dollar economic impact that will touch all walks of life in America. So, anything from food and textiles to fuels and energy to the automotive industry to housing, hemp will be there. And 20 years from now, when I'm long gone, people will say, well, what was the big deal?
And thank you so much for that, and obviously hats off to you for your work on the advocacy side as well as the business side of trying to make that a reality. So Geoff, thank you again for joining us on Consumer Choice Radio, and we will certainly hope to have you back at a later date with some exciting developments in the space.
Great. Again, happy holidays.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, All the best.
Sweet.